Now, it does me great pleasure to introduce today's co-host, who I'm so super excited about. She is someone that I have been following for quite some time. I love her work. I love her allyship. And she just brings such an incredible voice to this broad topic of equity and inclusion. And I cannot wait for you to also be able to experience all that she's going to bring and contribute to today's conversation. This is none other than Karen Fleshman, and here is her bio. She is a mentor, an activist, entrepreneur, attorney, author, educator, proud San Franciscan, she said that earlier, in California, and a single soccer mom. In 2014, she founded Racy Conversations. We're going to talk about Racy Conversations today, and I love the name. A workplace workshop facilitation company to inspire the anti-racist generation. She's currently seeking to publish her first book, White Women, We Need to Talk, Doing Our Part to End Racism. We've already kind of bonded just on that title alone, and the fact that that is something that she stands as a big advocate for, which I love. And so in your own way, through maybe some type of statements into the chat, help me to welcome our guest co-host today, Karen Fleshman. Karen, how are you? Feel free to unmute yourself and greet this audience in your own way. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, we can.
Yay! And you can see me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for having me on, Nika. It's such a pleasure to meet you, to see your beautiful face in person and not just as a photo on LinkedIn. And your whole amazing team is just so lovely and welcoming. And I'm really excited to engage in conversation. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in from all across the country.
Well, Karen, we have been looking forward to today because, as I mentioned, we are big fans of your work and your message and your platform and your allyship. And again, that's not a title that we just toss around without really being thoughtful about it. It's something that you've earned, and you've earned it because you have put in the work. And I see what you do, and I see the way in which you leverage your voice. And we're going to get into all of that because there's so many examples of it. And I want this audience to have the benefit of knowing that. But so I've given your accolades. I've read your bio, and there's so much more I could have shared. But generally speaking, this audience has been acquainted to your credentials and who you are. But I always like to ask our guests to share, what do we not know about Karen that we can't find in her bio? Just what about the lens that you bring to this conversation has shaped your work, and whatever else you want to share with this audience just about your DEI story?
Sure. Well, I think one really significant thing about me is that I was adopted. And I think that when you are adopted, it really just makes you aware of how random the world is. Like, what if my birth mother had kept me or decided not to have me? Or, I'd been adopted by some other family. It's like, there's so many things that are outside of our sphere of control that really shape how our lives become. And I think you have a heightened awareness of that if you're adopted. The other thing about me, I grew up in an almost entirely white community. It was a sundown town. By the time I was growing up there in the 80s, it was like a hotbed of the John Birch Society. But I was really so fortunate that when I was in elementary school, a family immigrated to our town from the former Soviet Union, and their daughter became my best friend. She's still the godmother to my children, still my closest friend. And I call her my diversity entry drug, right? Because imagine you're in this extremely homogenous community, and then this woman who's like the first Jewish person, the first refugee, the first brunette, like moves to the town, and you're just magnetized to her. And I think at a very early age, I saw how beneficial it was to have people who were different from you in your life. Like, her parents were into jazz and literature and making jewelry and very into the outdoors. And just because of them, I got exposed to all of that and to the wider world too. So those are two things about me that kind of shaped my life.
No, I love that. I love that. It gives us deeper perspective of, again, the lens in which you show up to this work. And so I'm grateful. When you mentioned that you were adopted, it reminded me that just a couple weeks ago, one of the guest co-hosts we had on the podcast, her name was Shantae Locklear, and we talked about inclusive leadership and specifically transracial adoptee perspectives. And so just the nature of that conversation allowed space for so many people to talk about their experiences. And so it just reminded me of that. So thank you. It's a topic that sometimes we don't necessarily bring into the diversity conversation and inclusion conversation, but there's a lot of complexities there that people may not be holding in mind that I was glad that we were able to amplify through that conversation. So thank you for also bringing it up in today's.
I want to watch that one because I don't know about the rest of the folks here. I am in love with the TV show This Is Us.
Oh,
And
yes.
this whole storyline of I mean, I have cried so much watching that show. I call it like my form of therapy. Like it's so cathartic, you know.
It is a
And
beautiful show.
yes, and I mean, I think adoption is complex, but transracial adoption is particularly complex. And I want to encourage any white parents on here who are transracial adoptees to really do your work and don't harm your children. If you love your children, you really, really got to do your own work of uprooting your anti-Blackness and uprooting your racism so that you're not harming them while you're, you know, raising them.
Yeah, absolutely. That came up a lot in that conversation. And so I do look forward to you taking a look at that. It was, we record all of our podcasts and we'll have to do a follow-up. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But thank you for sharing. So how and when did you come to the work that you're doing now? How did you come to this space?
Well, you know, kind of inspired by my childhood best friend. The early part of my career was in the immigrants' rights movement.
Mhm.
And I moved to New York City to work on an initiative of helping immigrants become citizens in the wake of immigration and welfare reform. And we helped 50,000 New Yorkers apply for their citizenship,
Wow.
something that I'm very proud of. And then in the post 9/11 economic downturn, we were defunded. And that was right around the time when reports came out that said 50% of Black men in New York City don't have a job. And we have nearly 200,000 young adult New Yorkers, almost entirely Black and Latinx, who are not in school, not working. And coming from the immigrants' rights movement, it was like, what? Like, how is that even possible? You know, immigrants face tremendous adversity, but everybody's working. So why aren't the people who were born and raised here working, especially in a city that people move to from all over the country for the limitless career opportunities? And
Right.
so I thought the answer to that question was job training, internships, connections to employers. And I dedicated 10 years of my career to doing that work, during which I became the mentor to hundreds of young Black and Brown young people as they began careers in corporate, in tech. And that was when I really had to face my racism because they'd
Yeah.
be telling, you know, we'd be engaged in conversation. I'd be like, why do I have so many harmful and inaccurate assumptions and stereotypes about you? And then when they were telling me their life story, I would always have to say, wait, what? Like it was incomprehensible to me. Many of their life experiences so different from mine. And then I moved to the Bay Area
Mhm.
during that time, continued doing that work here. And in 2014, I was really glued to Ferguson because I saw in Mike Brown the many young adults who I love, you know,
Yeah.
and I was very impacted when Darren Wilson wasn't indicted for killing Mike Brown. And a couple of weeks after that, I went out to brunch with two young Black women who graduated from the job training program I used to work for have
Mhm.
been working in tech companies for a couple of years. And they're telling me, I'm telling them how surprised I am that Darren Wilson wasn't indicted. They're telling me how surprised they are that I'm surprised. They said, no one ever gets indicted for killing us.
No.
And I was like, oh my God. And then they're telling me about what it's like for them at these tech companies. They're like, we're super grateful for our incomes and our lifestyles, the fact that we're able to stay in Oakland while many folks are getting gentrified out.
Yeah.
But coming into these companies and being the only Black woman as far as the eye can see, we are being bombarded by toxicity, a lot of it coming from women who look like you. Our own manager would tell us stuff like, oh, well, we just hired you because you're Black. And that was that moment where I was like, hold on.
Mhm.
I thought I was helping young people, but I'm actually putting them in harm's way. And
Mhm.
before I do any more of that work, I'm going to stop preparing young adults of color for the workplace and start preparing the workplace for young adults of color. And that was the genesis of Racy Conversations.
I so love that. You have to state that last portion again because it was just so powerful. Say that
Oh,
again,
thank
please.
you. Thank
Yes.
you. Stop preparing young adults of color for the workplace and start preparing the workplace for young adults of color.
Absolutely. Yeah. I so appreciate the perspective that you bring to this, and I know that it's what led, because obviously this is kind of your journey to racy conversation. So let's get into that a little bit more in depth. What type of experience is this? Give us a little bit of understanding of what people can anticipate if they were to be engaged.
Sure. Well, like the name implies, I think we learn best in conversation with each other. So the way I like to facilitate is to present some material and then tee up a question and get everybody talking with each other.
Mhm.
Often one-on-one. Now with Zoom, it's more like in small groups
Sure.
about that question and then facilitating back. What did you hear in that conversation? And it's interesting because people will be like, oh, I was dreading coming to this, but it's actually a real team builder because we're talking about these very deep things, right? We're talking about the beliefs and stereotypes we learned in childhood.
Yeah.
We're talking about the harm that we've experienced, and we're letting go of some of our shame and guilt,
Mm.
and really uniting. That my whole thing. You see right above me, I have my Audre Lorde is
Yes,
covering
Audre
the
Lorde.
room.
Yes, absolutely.
I see my life's work as teaching people how to relate across difference as equals. That's what I was put on this planet to do.
Yes. And to go a little bit more in depth, what does that look like specifically for you? What have you found to be the best practices that allows people to lean into such an experience where it can be effective? And specifically, I want you to maybe even address how do you create that, I don't want to say safe space, because we have internally at NWC, you've had a lot of conversations about, just naming a space safe is not what makes it safe. So let's kind of shift and think about how do we create brave spaces, but also allowing people to hold in mind what are those characteristics of that experience that allows people to feel as safe and comfortable as possible. So just talk about how do you get people to lean in?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is being very intentional, using your word, about creating some community agreements.
Yes.
And also part of it is about role modeling. So I love to co-facilitate with other people because I think people need to see what it looks like to relate across differences
Yes.
equals. And then that's almost more important than the content that you provide. It's the role modeling of it, right? And part of it is also just being really vulnerable about my own journey.
Yes.
I have caused so much harm, and I have believed terrible things, and and I'm really sorry, and I'm accountable for that harm,
Yeah.
and I'm continuing to learn and grow all the time. So, not coming in sanctimonious, like, I have achieved the highest level of anti-racism, but I'm struggling with this too. This is not easy. These systems were designed to make us confused and to make us feel like going against them is wrong. And
Yeah.
so it is really hard to do this, but the only way out is together, and that's what we're going to do, is figure this out together. We are capable of great things.
Yeah, the only way out is together. I love that, and I love the aspect of modeling as part of this racy conversation workshop experience. Because to your point, Karen, it does allow people to give themselves permission to lean into their vulnerabilities and to share. If there's someone who is that influencer standing before the others are willing to do that as well, and so I think that that level of authenticity and willing to be vulnerable is can be very contagious, and so I love that that's part of the experience. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
And,
you
and
all, yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. And one other thing that I liken it to, I was very happy to see the American Medical Association and the Centers for Disease Control to recognize racism as a public health emergency.
Absolutely.
That's how I always talk about at the beginning of a Racy Conversations workshop. I put up a this is a smoke-free campus sign.
Mhm.
And I asked people to recall, how long ago was it where people smoked everywhere?
Mhm.
It's really not that long ago. It was really up until the early 2000s, right?
Right.
And then the city of New York decided to ban smoking in all workplaces, including bars and restaurants, which was hugely controversial.
Mhm.
The hospitality industry,
Right.
the alcohol industry all came out against that. But they got it done. And then other cities followed.
Mhm.
And so now smoking has gone way down.
Right.
Deaths from smoking has gone way down. So my vision is that by 2040, when we're a majority people of color society, we have signs in every workplace that say, this is a harm-free campus. And we all understand what that means, and we all uphold it in the way that we interact with each other. Because racism, sexism, transphobia,
Yeah.
homophobia, all of it is a leading preventable cause of death, and we all have a role in preventing it.
Yeah. No, that was a big win. And I'm glad that people are starting to pay attention to that because, the severity of the harm and the trauma that's being caused, I think sometimes does not land on people as being as significant of an issue, and maybe it's because, the notion of I'm not impacted in that way. So it's not really as big of an issue as it is. So that was a really big win for all of us who are fighting the good fight, right? So you talk a lot about interracial sisterhood. What does that mean to you, and how do you practice that and bring that as a concept for others to be able to gravitate towards the message behind it?
Oh, wow. That is a beautiful question. Well, again, I
On
I'm very
slide.
influenced.
Yes,
And
love
then
her.
we have Frida over here, right? I also have a beautiful Shirley Chisholm. Um, I look at what Audrey was writing about, that our greatest challenge as women, the reason why we have had such limited success in this country is because every time we try to make social change, when we get together, we allow our differences of age, race, sex, and class to divide us. And the white women wind up causing harm. And then we fracture, and that keeps us very weak,
Mhm.
and allows the patriarchy to just flourish.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to learn how to relate across differences as equals, as Audrey said, if we're ever going to um, what does she say? The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Right.
We have to stop inflicting those tools on each other. And I myself, I mean, I just can't stand it, Nika. As a parent, I refuse that my children will have less rights than me, you know, and especially my daughter.
Yeah.
And it also has to do with the way that I raised my son, right? And I refuse that your child would be killed by the police and no one would be held accountable for it.
Yeah.
You know, and we all have a stake in this. And the only way that we will succeed is by uniting across those differences and recognizing the differences, but using them as a way to learn about each other and to strengthen our movement, as opposed to like, oh no, there's no way we can possibly collaborate.
Yeah, no, I love that. So how have you brought that concept to life? Do you actually have sessions, workshops, convenings where you're bringing together different women across different, generations, different races and ethnicities? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was really something I started doing after the 2016 election,
Mhm.
was convening interracial sisterhood conversations where I would bring together a group of 40, 50 women. And often we would have a series of like different women get up and give lightning talks, and each of them would tee up a question at the end of their lightning talk, and then everyone would pair with one other person and talk about what they heard, and then we'd switch partners so that the next lightning talk, you'd be talking with a different person. And also these conversations are very open. Like I want everyone, including allies, including, gender nonconforming people, including definitely including trans women. I am all about, if you are a fan of interracial sisterhood, I am a fan of you.
I love it. I love it. And I'm assuming that these are happening virtually now.
Yes, they are happening virtually now. And what I'm working on now is creating a year-long online learning community, because it's not enough to just come to one of these and split out. Like we need to be engaged in a series of conversations. And the framework that we're doing in the online learning community is first heal ourselves, because we're all carrying intergenerational trauma, right? And that's the white women are carrying it too. Ours is much more submerged. So healing our intergenerational trauma, so then we can heal our relationships with each other.
Right.
And then we can unite and heal our workplaces and communities. But we can't kind of leap into doing that work until we've done our inner work as well as our relational work.
I agree. So many people skip the step of recognizing the need for healing and reconciliation before you can move forward. And so I love that that's just built in to the process. So we have someone in our audience is asking, how can they get involved in the virtual conversations? Thank you, Melissa, for the question.
Yay. Okay. Yes. Please contact me. You can message me on LinkedIn and say that you want to get involved, and I will send you the stuff to get involved. Thank you so much for asking. Yes.
And we'll also make sure that we capture that information from you, Karen, so that we can include it in the follow-up that we send to all of those who registered for today's podcast, so that they'll have that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to talk about your book that you're working on right now. And so how close are you to being able to bring this so that the community at large can gain great value from the wisdom and the intel that I know is going to just, be from front to back in this book?
Well, let me just say it's been a bit of a frustrating experience. So I had a viral video in 2018, No More Permit Patties. And a literary agent reached out to me, and then I submitted I got a book contract, but I submitted the final draft of the book to that original publisher
Mhm.
last summer, and it just wasn't a good fit for their catalog. So we went back out trying to find another publisher, and to date, we have not found one. But I'm going to keep pounding the
Keep
pavement.
pounding. Yes,
Yes,
keep
exactly.
pounding.
That and I have like a 65, well, it's actually like a 71,000 word manuscript.
Yeah.
And I interviewed, I mean, so people were so gracious, and I interviewed so many incredible women in this book, and I'm really proud of it. Um, I may wind up cutting it down a little bit because some folks have said to me, this would be better as a series of 30,000 or so word
Hmm.
shorter books. So I'm still going back and forth with that. I am a lawyer, and I'm kind of a history nerd. So I went back 1619. We commemorated 1619 when the British slave traders
Yes.
brought the first boatload of enslaved people to Virginia, but we did not talk about the boatload that came a little bit after that, which was white women, because
Ah.
the plantation owners
Mhm.
realized that they needed to have white spouses so they could have white heirs to
Yep.
make this whole thing an intergenerational enterprise. And I mean, the whole way that they enmesh the laws of slavery, property, and marriage
Mhm.
is what really set white women up to be the monsters that many of us are today. And we have to go back and face that history. And I'm not excusing our behavior, and I'm not saying that we have our own agency and we should have rebelled against that.
Mhm.
But I can see how we became who we are. It was very intentionally designed for us to become who we are. And
Um,
part of our healing is to really understand that history.
yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's seems like that's part of the context of the book too, is what is the white woman's role and this body of work. And I think that providing that historical context to drive back to the root causes is so educational and so important for people to understand what is the path forward now to try to change this. And so I so appreciate that. And the book is entitled, at least right now, White Women We Need to Talk, doing our part to end racism. Well, we're hoping that you will continue to keep pounding the pavement because we want to see this come to fruition. So much great intel. I know so much great intel that I think is going to be so worthwhile for the community at large. So I have a couple additional questions, but I also want to invite the community to, if you have questions that are coming up for you, certainly feel free to place them into the chat, and I'll also give you a chance to unmute yourself and ask your question directly if you are interested and willing to do that. So let's go back to racy conversations. Again, I know that you've told us a little bit about it, and it's about inspiring the anti-racist generation. And so let's just stop there for a second, because I will tell you, the young people are so inspiring right now. The younger generations, they're so inspiring right now. And I think that we have a lot to learn from how in which they are showing up. And I don't take that away from any of the other generations, but yes, there's something that we have to learn from them. And it sounds like you've also concluded that as well. So tell me what you're seeing that's certainly a part of the platform that you have.
Yes. I love young people. I am energized by young people. And like I said, I serve as a mentor to many, many millennials. I'm Gen X, and also now many Gen Z. And I'm also the parent of 2 Gen Z. And I mean, my kids check me all the time. Okay.
Yes,
They are so
too.
much far advanced from me. And they'll be like, Mom, that's so sexist, and I'm like, oh my God, here I am. I think of myself as this like authority on this subject. And I'm still participating in these patterns of behavior. But the millennials have now surpassed the boomers as the largest generational group in both the workforce and in the electorate. And 43% of them are people of color. In Gen Z, it's 47%. In my son's age group, already children of color make up the majority. So when I say inspiring the anti-racist generation, I'm like, if we can just get 10% of the white millennials and 10% of the white Gen Z to really flip anti-racist, we can have a majority anti-racist generation and transform everything. And out of all the generations of white Americans, I believe strongly that white millennials have the most to gain from uniting across racial differences, because the costs of white supremacy have gone so high that it is actually harming the white people, the white millennials, the most. When you think about how much student loan debt they are burdened with, well, that's because we decided to do mass incarceration and invest our money in building prisons for Black and Brown people instead of in our public university system.
Right.
Or why they're so screwed, like they're still living at home with their parents because they can't buy a house. Well, that's because we had a whole subprime mortgage lending, systematic racism directed at Black and Brown people that caused them to lose their homes in foreclosure. And then all these institutional investors swooped in and bought up all the homes. And so they don't have houses to buy. So there's just so many places where that connection is so strong for the white millennials in terms of their self-interest in changing some of these policies. Now, I was pretty upset to see the percent of white millennials who voted for 45 actually increased between 2016 and 2020. And I know that the white supremacists are targeting our young people so hard. Prager University is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. They're on Instagram. They know where our Fortnite. They know where our young people are, especially our boys, and they are constantly trying to indoctrinate them because they're scared too. They know that they have to keep them on their side because they're losing, this numbers game. And so it's incredibly important for white parents to pay attention to what your kids are consuming and to teach your kids to be anti-racist from the very beginning. And I'm part of this amazing group, Moms Allyship Against Racism. We're a Facebook group. It's just incredible. And I encourage any moms on here, find us on Facebook, Moms Allyship Against Racism. And that's the work that we're doing in that group.
I love that. Moms Allyship Against Racism. We'll make sure we place that into the chat. And this is such good perspective. You're educating us. It's so insightful. Allie in our audience mentioned, as you were talking a moment ago, there's a lot of synergy between the message of Heather McGhee. She has the sum of us and the cost of racism to all of us. And I think that's an important message, especially for those who are sitting on the sidelines thinking, well, this is not really an issue. This is not really a problem. But it's only because it's not directly maybe impacting them, so they think, But if we can help bring that education to the forefront, then maybe we can bring people along in helping to solve this so that we all can emerge stronger. And you talked a lot just a moment ago, Karen, about the importance, and you mentioned the Facebook group of parents, taking their role to help instill this anti-racist mindset in children. And so what steps did you take to lead your children into developing an anti-racist mindset, or what do you suggest? That was a question that came from Diana from our audience.
Sure. And I also want to note, Christina, when I worked at a community college, there was heavy recruitment into far-right organizations on campus. Yes, they know exactly where to go to get young white people who feel disaffected, and try to recruit them. And that's why we have to be the countervailing voice so hard.
Yes.
With my own children, it was very much influenced by the way my parents talked to me about my adoption. So they started telling me from the time I could talk that I was adopted, that it was not anything bad, that they loved me very much. And so I never had that shock of finding out, oh, I'm adopted, or, oh, I'm a second class child because I'm adopted, So the same thing with my kids. I started talking with them about racism from the time they could talk. And we started learning about really the horrible history of our country from the time they could talk. And some people were like, well, you're watching Roots with your kids, like, isn't that a little heavy for them? And I'm like, what's heavy is not watching it with them and painting this whole picture that white people are, these wonderful people. And then when they do find out the true history, then they have the shock and the fragility sets in. Mm-hmm. But if I'm like, they go to a very diverse public elementary school, and the Black kids are learning this stuff. So I'm not going to shield my kids from learning it. They're going to learn this all together. Yeah. And that is the way that they are going to learn compassion and kindness and accountability and responsibility. And they're going to be super successful, because by the time they're at the peak of their career, this will be a majority people of color society. So if, as a white parent, you have not role modeled and taught your kids how to relate across differences equals, they're going to be looking at the society like they will not even be able to function within it. So this to me is one of the most important responsibilities and one of the greatest gifts that I could give to my kids. And they are not harmed by it, but in the least, they are empathetic and compassionate and intelligent and courageous. And like I said, way further along in their understanding of racism and sexism than I am.
I love that you labeled it as a gift, and because I think that right now we're faced where there's so many states. I think there's up to 7 states now that have really restricted and limited the way in which systemic racism is being taught in schools, and it's creating a problem. And so if schools and states are now getting to a point to where that's being questioned as divisive and should not be brought into the education system, then it is going to fall upon the parents and others, who are these influencers of young people, to help make sure they have this level of education and knowledge. And I like the fact that you said your kids aren't scared of it. It's because, again, we have to present the truth, not dilute it, but do it in a way to where it leads their young minds to want to deepen their empathy and compassion. That's so critically important. So I'm glad that you are kind of leading some of the work along those lines.
Thank you, Nika. And I really want to bring, through this Moms Allyship Against Racism, bringing moms together so we can support each other in this work.
Yes.
But I agree. What they're doing to Nicole Hannah-Jones, what they're doing to eliminate the mentioning of racism in schools, right, eliminate critical race theory from being taught. to me, this is a form of child abuse.
Mm,
Because teaching your kids a bunch of lies,
yeah,
I just can't imagine anything more harmful. Why would you
yeah,
do that? And it's not only about race, it's also about gender and sexuality, you know. And all they're trying to do to eliminate trans participation in
um,
sports. And I mean, it's like a war against children.
yeah.
And don't even get me started on the children in cages and this the finding the 215 bodies of First Nation children at that I
No,
can't even talk about it. It's
I
just,
know.
it's so much. It's always the children and the old people who are the most harmed. And
Mhm.
we just have, I am not like, we have to do something about this now.
Absolutely. 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 Thank you for the passion that you bring to this. And you're right. I love the fact that you were so deliberate with your words and you said that that's child abuse. I don't know if I've ever heard the context of that, but when we sit and we really ponder that and we think about it, yes, it is. It is. Um, Again, just the severity of that harm that sometimes people aren't realizing. So we have some additional questions that have come through, and I'm certainly happy to read the questions, but I want to just see if someone is willing to unmute yourself and ask your question live. If not, I can go to the chat and present it directly. I'll give it just a second. Yep.
Hi guys. Christina knows that we're working with Nika White right now, our organization. And Karen, thank you so much for everything you've shared today, and to Nika White team for hosting this conversation. Something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, I just returned from maternity leave and trying to take a step back to think about how our organization functions. And particularly, we are a majority white organization. And I certainly think like suffuses everywhere, fall prey to sort of white supremacist work culture, sense of urgency, obsession with the written word, perfectionism, like all of these things. And I think this is within your framing of changing the workplace, not the people who come in. Like if you had to pick, 2 or 3 things that are good to implement to try to dismantle that, like what would you suggest?
Whoa, that's a great question. Well, and I'm so glad you're taking the time. And I think coming back from maternity leave, anytime you can get a break and sort of look at the organization with fresh eyes is such a good opportunity to do that assessment. I would start by talking with the underrepresented folks who work there and asking them how it is like for them at the organization and what they would most like to see change, what would make it better for them, and really centering it around that. And it's not only the dynamics within the workplace, but how are you serving the community, right? So you also need to be conscientious of who your consumers are and the community in which you operate. So you not only do you want to listen to internal stakeholders, but you want to listen to external stakeholders. And something I talk about a lot is prior to the pandemic, median Black net wealth, it was on the trajectory to be 0 by 2053. Median Latinx net wealth projected to be 0 by 2073. And companies are driving that. They are profiting from that. So I think it behooves every company to say, to really examine in what way are we contributing to the racial wealth gap in terms of the products and services that we put into the marketplace, and what can we do to take intentional action to stop contributing to that and to go against it and to close the racial wealth gap, but both in terms of the salaries that we're paying and the benefits we're providing to our own employees, as well as our role in the marketplace.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Ally. And so Christina, I saw that you had your hand raised. Did I see that correctly?
Don't believe so. I know that Lauren has her hand raised.
Oh, okay.
So,
Lauren. Hey, Lauren.
Hi, Karen. Hi, Nika. So my question, and in my usual fashion, it's not very clear, but wondering your thoughts on the business case for diversity. Because for me, it's like, it's almost a form of white supremacy, because it's like, tell me why people that don't look like me should be here. And there's so many layers to the sustainability of diversity, because if you don't have inclusion and equity in the policies and procedures, you can't sustain diversity. So if someone were to ask you the business case, is that a question that you would avoid, or how would you answer that?
Well, that is a very good question. I mean, because you're trying to engage people and get them to care, right? And people have different entry points about what motivates them to care. But I think the thing that bugs me the most about the business case for diversity, it's like, okay, so it's almost like we want to teach you how to be able to exploit your people more efficiently. Right? It's like, is that really the end goal? I don't really want to be a part of that, if so. So if people ask me the question about the business case for diversity, I've certainly read all the studies, and I can cite the various findings of the studies. But to me, it's really about, like I said, the country is changing. The workforce is changing. The market is changing. And there is so much, like, why are we at war with each other? Like, there is so much to gain from just getting to know each other and like creating great workplaces and great products and tapping into all of the brilliance that is throughout our country. And why wouldn't you want to do that? Like, why would you want to create something that's really harmful and toxic when you could create something that's totally warm and inviting and like is gonna unleash just like boundless creativity and be so responsive to our society? To me, that's kind of my take on the business case, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Lauren, and I appreciate your response, because you started by stating that people have different motivators for really wanting to engage in this work. And as I think about what you shared earlier and how a lot of the young millennials are being targeted, right? They're being strategic. And I feel like as we approach this work, we also have to think strategically. So if talking about it in a way that allows people to enter into the conversation, to be able to influence, change behavior where it may need to change, means that we have to align with what's a motivator for them to engage, then starting there is sometimes a part of the strategy, right? Part of what we have to do to help bring them along. So I appreciated that question. So Zoe has a question in our audience today. And Zoe, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question directly? I'll give you just
Sure. Thanks so much for taking the time, everyone. Actually, I'm really appreciating this conversation. I'm in Canada, so I'm one of those who are struggling mentally right now with the 215 Indigenous bodies of children that were found, because I'm tired of this conversation acting like it doesn't exist, and then we keep getting proof. So Karen, I was hoping you can give some maybe insider perspective on conversations with white women that you're finding constantly come up when you're trying to have the open conversation. What are those conversation blockers? And as a consultant, I was hoping that you can also share maybe ways that we can have more open conversation with people in organizations, i.e. HR managers who are women, and constantly have this blocking language, hypersensitivity. If you have any insights on how to have a more open conversation with them, or are there things that, do's and don'ts that you can kind of help us out with, who are consultants, when this is basically our entry into an organization? kind of a long-winded, but thank you.
Great question, Zoe, and huge hug to you. I mean, having these conversations with the white women in HR on a daily basis. I wish I was talking with someone the other day who has a white woman boss, and I was like, I would literally rather gnaw through my own arm than report to a white woman. I know that sounds terrible, but it's just so frustrating. How can it, and HR is such the classic white women's role within the company, right? Where we're not gonna be in the C-suite, except for in a position where we're supposed to be controlling and really keeping the budget in line. And we approach harm in the workplace the way we approach harm by police, right? Where it's a line item in the budget to pay off the person who complains of discrimination with as least amount of money as possible and keep the harmer working there. And this whole cycle just perpetuates. So as far as strategies, I have an article, white women, how to show up as allies. And I think that in that article, I would just share that, with some of these white women, or because it lists a lot of the things that we need to change, and it has a lot of links to different resources. I think a lot of the change is going to have to come white woman to white woman, holding these folks to account, because it's really hard, especially if you're trying to engage them to hire you in a business, then you want to, how can I put it? It's really hard to hold them to account while you are trying to get them to buy your services. So I think if you can find one or two white women within the company who are open to this conversation and who can start to build that to bridge to the other white women, that could be one strategy for doing it. And just keep at it. And I do believe that our maniacal need for control is rooted in this intergenerational trauma that we are carrying from the beginning. Like literally, we were brought to this country to police the racial hierarchy, and we were taught to do it and rewarded for doing it from the time that we were girls. So it's going to be a long journey of unlearning for white women to stop engaging in these harmful behaviors. And I'm sorry, I wish I could be more like direct in my answer, but I think it all begins in one-on-one conversations and pointing out to them, what you just did right now is harmful, and here's why. And getting them to move toward accountability.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Zoe, and thank you, Karen. We have a few moments left, but I saw Jimelin. Did you have your hand raised? Would you like to address the group? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Nika and Karen. And I like that last question. That's why I'm wanting to speak right now. I work in HR, and I work at a public accounting firm, financial services industry. I'm clearly a woman. I'm clearly Asian American. I am the mother of my multiracial daughter, who is 10 months yesterday. And this is probably the second or third of these Fridays that I've watched. So thank you, Nika, for having them. And Karen, I'm in Daly City. So I work in San Francisco, but I live in Daly City. And everything you just said, like, we need more people like you, and maybe you can educate more companies out there and white women out there. There's just, I'll just speak to my truth. Like I found out I was pregnant, and I had a baby in the pandemic where she was born last August. Like, nobody could visit me in the hospital, no in-person baby shower, nobody at work saw my bump growing because I work from home. And those are kind of like the superficial things, but the things that you expect and you like look forward to. But becoming a mom in the summer of 2020, and I mean, luckily she was alive when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was. But there's just so much that comes up in postpartum, but also like now that she's like born and like out, and she's a girl, she's a woman, she'll be a woman, she's multiracial. Like, I don't know what it's like to be half white, and neither does my husband to know what it's like to be Asian. But like, we for sure have a responsibility to help make the world she's growing up in a better place. And I'm glad that she is. And I believe she's Generation Alpha. I think that's the next one after Gen Z. And it's just such a different time that she's growing up in than I did in the 80s and 90s. And I'm so inspired by the Gen Z. I was going to be an elementary teacher in San Francisco public schools. I certainly did years of it, volunteering, but I would hope, I feel like my mission that I'm supposed to fulfill, my purpose, is to help educate others, including white women and just other women and just anybody really, about the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, like all those things, and why they're important, what they are, so that we all can feel like we belong, and not feel like I did when I was in elementary school in a small Catholic school in a small beach town, of like, you're different. I mean, kinder, first, second grade, my best friend was white, and I didn't realize I was brown. Like, we were just friends. That's what kids, I mean, racism is taught, not innate. And I'm so glad to join this, and I'll have to watch the recording because I didn't get to watch all of it, but I'm air hug to you as well. And yeah, I'd love to just keep learning more and keep watching these on Fridays and learn more about Karen, what your work is. And last year just reinvigorated this passion in me that I had when I was a full-time college student, of like, we need to learn, we need to help each other, we need to raise up other women that are working moms of color, and just women and that are moms and that are working. But there's so much more work to do. And just like you said, we have to prepare companies to be a space for people of color, and especially, young men of color as well. Not prepare the employees to go into those spaces, because those spaces are not designed to help someone like me. They're not designed to help me succeed. It's like, oh, here, do like something like an administrative thing. It's like, no, I'm a leader. Like, I can do so much more. I mean, I'm a teacher, I'm now a mother. I mean, there's a lot of people that need to learn a lot, and I'm always learning as well. And like, kind of healing what I grew up with. And now I have to like teach my child to be anti-racist and feminist, and just not let any label someone puts on her to like prevent her from achieving her dreams.
Keep in touch, definitely, Jolyn. I'm so grateful that you shared your story, and I'm here to support you. That postpartum, like, I can't even imagine in a pandemic. Yeah. I was so hormonal, and just, it was a very intense time in my life, working a very intense job. So
Yeah.
I'm here to support you in any way I can. Thank you, Nika. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for coming and sharing. And Jenilyn, thank you for your comments towards the end. It was such a great way to kind of end our conversations with the beautiful words you shared. We are grateful, Karen. There's so much more that we could talk about. But again, as I mentioned at the start, an hour goes by way too fast. But we're grateful that you came and shared with us, and we look forward to continuing to support your work. And thank you to each of you who joined us today. If you found this useful, then certainly feel free to share it with others. The recording will come out this afternoon, along with a couple of the resources that many of you in this community shared, but we're just grateful. Enjoy your weekend. And again, happy Pride Month, everyone. Bye-bye.